Today, we're pleased to welcome Secretary of State Jon Husted, who will present and discuss the 3 statewide ballot issues for the upcoming November election. Our CMC political season forums are brought to us with support from Hannah News and the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, represented here by many of their associates. Please help me thank them. Now, one thing that's slightly different today is that questions will be submitted in writing. If you have a question, please use the piece of paper in your forum flyer, write down your name and your question. Then members of CMC's program committee will be walking around collecting those about midway through the discussion. They're then going to select questions for content and relevance and read them aloud during our question and answer portion. First elected to public office in 2000 as a member of the Ohio House of Representatives, only 4 years later, his colleagues elected him Speaker of the House. After 2 terms as Speaker, Jon Husted was elected to the Ohio Senate, where he was a leading advocate for redistricting reform, a cause he continues to champion as Secretary of State. Also, as it is football season, we should note that Secretary of State Husted was an All-American defensive back and member of the 1989 Division III National Championship University of Dayton football team. So you all are allowed to say "Go Flyers." I'm at Ohio State. I'm not allowed to say that. Please welcome Ohio Secretary of State. Secretary Husted will make opening remarks and then join Mike Thompson, News Programming Director at 89.7 NPR News and host of WOSU's Columbus on the Record, for the interview of the portion of our program. Secretary Husted, the podium's yours.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today. I am happy to have the chance to talk about the issues that you will be deciding on here in the near future. As Ohio's chief elections official, obviously we stay pretty on everything that happens. I remind you, though, that this is not the presidential election, all right, that we're going to be, even though that's garnered the majority of the attention, that is still 14 months away. I actually saw Jim Siegel tweet something the other day that said there will be 2 complete high school football seasons that will come and go before the presidential election happens. And I thought that was very humorous, but also true. Now, I will say, though, that as we lament and talk about all of the nonsense that goes on in the reality TV version of the presidential elections that we see out there in America, it's a far better way to elect a president than it is in places like China and Russia. We are very privileged to have the opportunity for self-governance, and we should take advantage of it and enjoy it. But the 2015 elections are right around the corner. Actually, voting starts in 17 days if you are a military or overseas voter. That's when we send ballots out. So this is not a far distant process. It's right around the corner. There will be lots of issues that you will get a chance to decide on in the 2015 November elections. In Columbus, there will be a mayoral race, certainly, that has a lot of people's attention. Those kinds of elections and so forth will be taking place across Ohio. But there will be 3 potential amendments to the Ohio Constitution, issues 1, 2, and 3, that will be before you this November, and that's what I want to focus my remarks on today. I can sum it up by saying that all 3 are about monopolies. The first one, issue 1, is about ending a political monopoly. Issue 2 is about ending private monopolies, and issue 3 is about granting a new monopoly. And I know that there will be a lot of lively discussion over the course of the next few months about how to vote on these things, but there is no doubt, no matter which side you are, which side you take on these issues, the advocates and the detractors all agree that these will have lasting, meaningful impact in the future of the state of Ohio, and which will impact our politics, our economy, our government, our culture for many, many years to come. Issue 1 is redistricting reform. This has been a long time coming for me. When I was elected Speaker in 2005, I actually opposed a ballot initiative that would have done redistricting reform in a partisan manner. We tried to get it done in a bipartisan manner. I've been working on this issue for the better part of 10 years now. So you can see I'm having a big impact. But hopefully we all will have a big impact, in my view, this November. Let me first describe what the process is now for how we draw legislative districts. You elect every 10 years after the census, or every 10 years, what's called the apportionment board, which is the governor, the auditor, the secretary of state, a Democrat from the legislature, a Republican from the legislature. Whichever party wins the majority of the 3 statewide offices has control of drawing the legislative maps. There are some regulations about how they can draw them, but they have a great deal of authority, the apportionment board does, as to how you draw them. And the practical impact is, thanks to our demographic shifts, the way people live, thanks to computer technology, that you can draw districts that favor heavily one party in that district, which means that if it's the Republicans draw it, that the Republican will win that district. If a Democrats draw it, they can make it so that the Democrats win a particular district. But by the time you divide this all up, the vast, vast majority of all of our legislative districts are drawn in a manner in which whichever party they were designed to be drawn for, they basically win, with very little impact from or very little consequence from the general election voters. The primary election voters are the ones that are establishing who serves you in the General Assembly. And after, I think we're now in 5 decades of doing it this way, I think that there is a growing consensus from people on both sides of the political spectrum that it doesn't work, that it could be improved. The hard part of that has been finding a proposal that everybody could agree on. And you have one that will be before you in November. It will do this. It will create a 7-member board that will have the governor, the auditor, secretary of state, 2 minority members of the legislature, 2 majority members of the legislature, but it will require at least 2 votes from a member of the minority party to pass any plan, and there are restrictions built around it that minimize gerrymandering, that keep districts more compact, that will make them more competitive, and in my view, improve our democracy. And it passed the Ohio legislature by a vote of 82-8, and it in the House, and 28-1 in the Senate. It will be before you as issue 1. A yes vote on issue 1 will approve the amendment. A no vote will reject the amendment and leave things the way that they are now. Let me move on to issue 2. Issue 2 is an anti-monopoly amendment that protects against using the initiative process for personal gain. It's essentially what the issue 2 ballot initiative does. It was sponsored in a bipartisan manner by Representative Ryan Smith, who's from Southeast Ohio, Representative Mike Curtin, who's from the Columbus area. This was spawned out of some conversations that happened in the Constitutional Modernization Commission, out of a growing concern that self-interests were being sought by constitutional amendment. That started with the initial casino issue that happened a few years ago that was approved by the voters, and now issue 3 that you will be facing that does a very similar thing with marijuana. Essentially, they're trying to stop what has been a common process of allowing small groups of people to use their wealth to amend the Constitution for their own benefit. And literally in the process that's been designed now, the way that you go out, it's hard for a citizens group to do it, but if you have $2 million, it's easy to hire a bunch of signature gatherers to go out, collect the signatures, and put something on the ballot. And this would create some prohibitions against the creation of a monopoly for personal gain. The legislature wanted to stop that from happening. That's why they created issue 2. And I will tell you, though, that the main issue that comes up on this is whether or not, what if they both pass? What if issue 2 passes? What if issue 3 passes? That is the main issue that comes up when you talk about issue 2. And I will tell you quickly that if they both pass, issue 2 will have preeminence. The legislature designed it that way. They wrote it There are three main ways that this can happen. One, in their provision, they said if issue 2 passes, it prohibits the narcotic aspect of issue 3 from going into effect. Also, it would prohibit a monopoly, which is another way that it would prohibit issue 3 from going into effect. This was initiated by the legislature, which means it will go into effect immediately. Issue 3 was initiated through a petition process, which means it will go into effect 30 days after. As a result, issue 2 would go into effect before issue 3. And then there's another provision of the Constitution that says that if issues conflict on the ballot, the one that gets the most votes wins. So for all of those reasons, if issue 2 were to prevail, it would have preeminence over issue 3. On issue 2, a yes vote is to approve the constitutional amendment to add it to the Constitution. A no vote would be to reject it and leave the Constitution in this respect the way that it is now. Now, issue 3 has been probably the most high profile of all of these issues. It would grant a monopoly for the commercial production and sale of marijuana for recreational and medicinal purposes. It was initiated by a self-titled group of investors called Responsible Ohio. It would legalize the use of recreational and medical marijuana. The only people who could grow and sell that are the 10 property owners at up to 1,100 locations around the state. However, individuals could grow up to 4 plants for personal use. Opponents have focused on the monopoly component of this and concerns about health and safety, particularly as it could potentially target children with food products like cookies and candy. The proponents have highlighted the legal availability of marijuana, both for its medicinal value and ending the cost of enforcement of marijuana laws in the state of Ohio. They've also touted other economic benefits as a reason to support issue 3. Newspapers around the state have widely denounced it. Responsible Ohio will run apparently an aggressive campaign with many TV ads and have been touring around college campuses in the state trying to generate more voter turnout and improve their chances of being successful. All of these amendments are available on our website at the Secretary of State's office, so you can read the actual amendments themselves. The ballot language is there as well, and the arguments for and against are there as well. It's been up there for a while, and I can promise you we've had dozens of people look at it. But I hope that more will, because this is important stuff, folks. You can have whatever opinion you want about it, but these issues will change the future of Ohio. From a political point of view, there has been no amendment, in my opinion, more than issue 1 that's going to change the culture of how Capitol Square works. Nothing in my lifetime that I've seen will make as much difference in this. And I say that as a former Speaker of the House and somebody who has been in the legislature, who served in the legislature for 10 years. This will change the culture of that institution. Obviously the others will have an economic consequence. They will have a cultural consequence. They will have a health consequence. They will have a law enforcement consequence. Those are big issues. You should spend some time doing your own research and coming to your own conclusions on these. And as the Secretary of State, I have to remind folks that you need to get out there and vote. Sometimes these off-year elections don't generate the voter turnout that perhaps we wish, but even on-year elections, as we call them, and the bigger elections. In the last gubernatorial election, we had only slightly better than 40% of all the voters turn out. More than 100,000 absentee ballots in the last gubernatorial election went out to people who'd requested them and were never returned. They sat right there on their kitchen table or on their nightstand, never to be returned. We had 1,000 poll workers in the last election, more than 1,000 poll workers, who didn't vote. They were at the polls, folks. They didn't vote, okay? And there were 75 elections in Ohio over the last 2 years that have been decided by one vote or tied. 75 for mayoral races, school levies, things that will matter that were decided by one voter tied. I talked to a mayor up in a community in north central Ohio who lamented that he had lost the mayor's race up there by one vote. And then he realized that all five of his cousins didn't vote in the election. I'm presuming in his story that they would have voted for him. But the point of the matter is there's a lot of close elections. There's a lot at stake. I hope you will do your homework, and I hope that you will get out there and vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Again, if you have questions, please write them down, and the CMC staff and program committee members will gather them and sort them and screen them for fairness, balance, relevance, and bad words, that kind of stuff. So write your questions down. The way I see this election, Mr. Secretary, is the only way we're going to get fairly drawn legislative districts is to legalize pot. No?
Well, if that's the way I explained it, I did a poor job.
You know, a little ganja might go a long way to helping with bipartisanship. But anyway, more seriously, the big issue right now in the news that you played a role in as chair of the ballot board is what voters will see when they get into the voting booth or in the absentee ballot with regards to issue 3, which is the amendment which would legalize marijuana, recreational use and medicinal use. But the first thing that you will see is in bullet points, which is helpful. But the first bullet point talks about the monopoly. The second bullet point talks about the 1,100 retail locations. The third bullet point talks about the edibles, the cookies, and things like that. The fourth bullet point says that anyone over 21 will be able to use, possess marijuana. In journalism, we call that burying the lead. Why isn't that top on the list, the legalization aspect?
Well, I would say that as we discussed this at the ballot board, and as I considered my role in establishing the title, we wanted to look at the relevant factors of what does it do, what's the product, what are the method of distribution and production, and what is the business model for which this is established. Those are the relevant things. And we try to write language that is done in a way that explains what we believe. This is a 6,600 word amendment. We have to pull out the things that we think are the most important for the voters to know. And that's what we believe we did. Look, I understand the advocates on the other side of this. They brag in their prospectus that they had used language that had been poll tested and that they believed the voters would support. Well, anybody that's trying to sell you a product does that, whether it's a cigarette company, a car company, whatever. They have language they would like to use. What we try to use is simple, plain language that we believe the average voter will understand and that accurately describes the issues, and that's exactly what we did.
But the title says, on the thing that voters will see, grants a monopoly for the commercial production and sale of marijuana for recreational and medicinal purposes. Doesn't that bend too far to the arguments against this amendment, when this amendment really, at its essence, however it's done, the most important thing it does is legalize marijuana?
Well, and that's what the title says, because let's walk through the process. How does it happen? The folks who wrote this, if they didn't want it called a monopoly, then they shouldn't have created a monopoly. That's what it is. I mean, you look at the dictionary, and that's the definition of monopoly, when a small group of people have control of a commodity and they have pricing power and how it's both produced and sold. That's exactly what this does. And that's incredibly important that the voters know that. It also talks about the product, marijuana, for recreational and medicinal purposes, which it also does. And look, this is in the Constitution. It's in the Constitution of the state of Ohio. I mean, this is a really important thing for people to know about whether that happens.
Those things are all in the amendment and should be on the ballot. Boy, I guess it's the placement and the emphasis on monopoly versus legalizing marijuana for medicinal and recreational uses.
I mean, I guess, look, I know that's their argument, but that's what it does. I mean, we wrote, this is what it does. It creates a monopoly for the purposes of production and sale of marijuana for recreational and medicinal purposes. If you're okay with that, then you should vote yes to approve it. If you don't think it's a good thing, then you should vote no. But we shouldn't confuse the issue. That's what it does.
One of the things I also question is the definition of the word monopoly. So I did. I went to my dictionary or online, and
I've got it right here too.
It says exclusive ownership through privilege, command of supply or concentrated action, exclusive possession or control, commonly controlled by one party. The definition of exclusive is not shared, available to only one person or group. Granted, it's a relatively small group, but there are still 10 growers. If you read the paper today, there are 24 folks who are actively investing in these. Isn't monopoly too strong a word for that many people?
Well, I'm going to go through here in an exclusive privilege to carry on a business, traffic, or service granted by a government. That's what this would be doing. That's monopoly. Exclusive control of a commodity or service for a particular market, or a control that makes possible for the manipulation of prices. Look, that's what this does. The group is responsible Ohio. They are the petitioner. Yeah. They are the ones seeking this for those 10 individuals. And we explain it. That's the title, and then it's explained. The 6 major newspapers in this state who've editorialized on this called it either a monopoly or a cartel. They've done it in 14 editorials at least 24 times. So the language that we're using is the language that's commonly being used to discuss this particular ballot issue. And when you're writing ballot language for the people to consume, you write things that explain it in a way that is clear, not to use what I call weasel words that allow you to mask what the truth of something is versus what it really is. And so what we're trying to use are plain language that explain an issue in a way that reveals what it's all about.
Issue 2 also deals with monopolies. It would, as you described, it would bar narrow private interest from changing the Constitution. I guess the question I've always had is who decides what is a narrow business interest? Who decides what's a monopoly? Because as we've seen, it could be 10 people, it could be 3 people, it could be 100 people.
I mean, if you want a practical answer for that, the way I read the amendment is the people that will decide that are the ballot board, and then ultimately, when we get sued, then the Supreme Court of the state of Ohio.
Sued?
So that's
Never
when
been sued before.
No, but that's how this process works, and you know that's what our system is that, and this will be a chance for the voters to decide first of all. So when you say who decides, you do. You all do. You get to decide this. You're going to put it in the Constitution or you're not going to put it in the Constitution. And then you're going to send it, and then I'm going to take an oath that says I uphold the Constitution, and then that's what I'll do. That's how it works.
The redistricting amendment creates, as you mentioned, the 7-member commission. You have to get 2 minority votes, so it has to be you have to get bipartisanship. But if you don't, the districts still get drawn, and they only last for 4 years. So is that really an incentive for, in this hyper-partisan culture we're in right now, won't the hyper-partisan folks say, you know what, I'll take the 4 years and keep my seat and keep the districts the way they are so I can get the things I want?
I don't believe so, because if they, you know, the tiebreaker provision is in there just so that everybody knows that there is a potential under issue 1 that if you can't come to bipartisan agreement, you could have a tie. And then what is the tiebreaker provision? I never believed that there was a need for a tiebreaker provision because I believe that the public pressure on statewide elected officials is sufficient to do it the right way. And I believe that's the case even when you go to the tiebreaker provision because they'll draw districts. If they can't agree on a bipartisan basis, they'll draw districts. But the first time around that this happens, those same statewide elected officials who drew it will also be on the ballot for re-election at that point in time. So there is as will the drawn districts be before the voters at the same time. So I think it's highly unlikely that you're going to stand for re-election and draw a map at the same time that will be on the ballot at the same time you will be on the ballot that does not reflect a fair redistricting process. But they decided to put a tiebreaker provision in there. That's how the tiebreaker provision works. But I do not believe that we'll ever go to that. And while I recognize there is no such thing as a perfect process, I would stand and argue all day that what we're doing in issue 1 is better than what we have now. You know, anytime you do these issues, people say, well, there's a flaw here, there's a flaw there. Well, you got to compare it to what the alternative is. The alternative is to continue to do it the same way that we've done it, which allows for partisan districts to continue to be drawn, and that's not good. I can tell you that the culture of how the legislative process works is not good when everybody who gets sent there does so from a very partisan district, because your incentives, look, we believe in market forces. The market forces in politics are to focus on primary voters only in the way we draw districts, and not on the voices of the general election voters. And that has to change, and it won't change until we do something like issue 1.
It does not include congressional districts, which are as gerrymandered, if not more so, than the state legislative districts. Do you wish it included congressional districts in this issue?
I do wish it did. When I've done this in the past on my own, under my own structures of where I've tried to do these in the past, I had congressional districts involved. I believe congressional districts should be involved. I know why the legislature didn't. I'm happy that we at least have legislative districts. That does have the potential to impact congressional districts, because you remember that congressional districts are drawn not through the apportionment board, but through a bill that goes through the House and the Senate and to the governor's desk. So when you draw fair legislative districts, you're more likely that one chamber could be controlled by either party and thus impact it. But I do believe that a similar proposal as has been created for legislative districts should be done for congressional districts. I think it's in the existing interest of our congressional members to do that. I've often said to them individually that I believe that ultimately another ballot issue will come up on the congressional district issue, and that the legislature and our congressional delegation should be proactive in creating something that they can live with that has an Ohio flavor, rather than somebody coming from another state to come in here and trying to do it. And that would be, I think, not the way we'd like to see it happen. You
mentioned in your remarks that these 3 issues are going to have a profound effect on the future of the state of Ohio, but it is an odd-year election. And if we get 25% turnout, it's probably pretty good. Should these constitutional amendments only be on elections, on ballots, when we choose a president or a governor, an even-year election?
I mean, I think there's an argument for that, but that's sort of giving up on democracy, saying, well, you know, we can only entice people to care during certain times. I mean, we should all care. And I'm going to remind you, if you're one of the 25%, your voice is stronger than everybody else's, because when fewer voters vote, your voice has more impact. Your voice matters more. And there's an element of personal responsibility that needs to exist in elections. You know, you have to care. You have to care. And I believe that with issue 1, we will make elections more relevant. We're going to make elections like the legislative elections more relevant to the average voter. But we have to, you know, people have to care. This, you know, as I tell you, I look around the world. You know, only 1 in 4 people in the world live in a country where you actually can vote and have all of these, have access to an actual democracy where you have freedom of speech, freedom of the press, private property rights, the ability to run for office and vote in a legitimate democracy. Only 1 in 4 people in the world live in a country like that. And we have to celebrate that. We have to celebrate these privileges, but we have to care, and it takes some personal responsibility.
You're a Secretary of State. You are in charge of running elections around the state, fair elections, making sure the process is conducted, you know, fairly and no one gets an advantage. But you're also a ranking member of your party, Republican Party. You have positions on a lot of issues. How do you balance your political life, member of the Republican Party, leading member of the Republican Party, with your role as basically the referee for elections?
Well, it's because you use the law. The law is very clear. And if you ask anybody on my staff who's been through this, some of them are here today, you know, the first question I ask when an issue comes to us, I say, well, what's the law on it? What do the attorneys say? let me read it, let me see it. And if it's clear, then it's an easy choice. It's easy to know what to do. The problem is that oftentimes in the most controversial cases, in some circumstances, the law is not clear, or there's no law that speaks to it, or it's a unique situation, and then you have to use judgment. And typically, we have some operating values for decision making that we use. And I do my best to make what I consider as a fair judgment. And I think that as an elected official, if people don't like the judgments I've made, then they'll vote me out. But there's also a backup to this. This is what the legal process is. We all have checks and balances. That's the great thing about how our process was designed. The legislature makes a law. I interpret the law. The court determines whether or not I interpreted the law the right way. And it all works out. It doesn't always work out the way I want it to, but in the end, it's a very good system. I'm held accountable by the voters, and I happily report I won by over 24% of the vote the last time and won 86 of 88 counties. So the voters rendering their judgment on the job that I've done so far, I think they've supported it. We
elect judges, but they are prohibited, or they by the code or judicial conduct, not to take stands on issues. Should the Secretary of State, not just you, but any Secretary of State, be barred from endorsing or campaigning against anything that's on the ballot?
I mean, if that happened, it wouldn't bother me, but I don't think it's necessary. I mean, how many people are going to go out and vote on something based on whether I endorsed it? Seriously, I mean, come on.
Well, you could argue that there's, just look at the heat.
I know that I wish everybody was sitting out there going, "What's Jon Husted think about this?" But that's not how it happens. They come to their own conclusions, and frankly, what my views on it. People should know my views on it. If I'm going to be making these decisions, they should know my views on it and come to a judgment about whether I rendered that decision fairly or not.
We're going to take questions from the audience in just a few moments, so if you last chance to write them down, and our program committee will look for them. Do you want to be governor?
What's that? We have 2015, 2016. Let's wait for 2018 to come, and we can talk about it at a future set.
Well, that's the campaign. Do you want to be governor? Do you think you'd be a good governor?
What I want?
Is it a job that attracts?
If that's the question, someday I would. Yeah, no question.
All right. What do you think of Donald Trump?
I have some great Donald Trump lines I can't use here, but I won't use them. You know what? I'm not a fan. Not a fan. I think that his tactics don't speak to the aspirations of what we want for America for everybody. And I think that, it doesn't mean that he doesn't make a good point here and there. It doesn't mean he doesn't reflect people's frustrations with government. But we got to remember we're a government for everybody. And we need to be talking about how we lift everybody up. And I think the Republican candidate needs to be somebody that is an aspirational figure.
Do you worry that he's damaging your party's chances next year?
I don't worry about that because I believe in democracy, and I believe in the end that these issues will work themselves through. You know what? Sometimes it's good in democracy for people to get their anger out. And so there is anger out there about some of these issues, and Donald Trump makes good points about a few issues that represents the anger that exists in the country. So I don't want to dismiss that. But I do believe in the end that these issues, we can work through these issues. But we should have candid conversations about them, and not sometimes. I've been tough on him. Sometimes you need to use language that speaks clearly to people so that they know what everybody's talking about. And the fact that a lot of people do support him, though, reflects that frustration and anger is out there. And we should listen to that. But we also have to be a lot less strident in how we react to people.
All right. Let's go to our audience questions.
Great. Thank you for being here, Secretary. My name's Tim Sword. I'm with Greater Columbus Sister Cities International, and I'm reading the question for Shirley Billings. What is your office doing specifically to encourage voting and access to the ballot box all over Ohio and for all eligible demographics?
So what are we doing to increase voting? Well, one of the things that we hope to get through the legislature this year, which we've been able to get through the Ohio Senate, is online voter registration. Let me emphasize registration, not online voting. Online voter registration, it will obviously make it more convenient for voters to be able to cast a ballot, to get registered so that they can cast a ballot. It will save money because we no longer have to process hundreds of thousands of paper proposal or paper registrations. The boards of elections can automatically upload them into the statewide voter database, cross-check them. It's very easy. We'll save them probably $3 million during a presidential election cycle if we're able to do that. And look, local governments want to save money every way they can. That's why we have at least 70 county commissioners who've written letters of endorsement. 70 boards of county commissioners written letters of endorsements for what we're trying to do there. And it's more secure, because I get that. Safety, security, access, it's more secure when you do it that way because we can automatically cross-check it with the BMV, which, by the way, the BMV has been a great partner with us in helping to update our voter rolls and make things work better. And if we do that, it'll be secure, it'll save money, it'll make it easier. That's one of the major things that we're trying to get done. The Senate has passed it by a huge, overwhelming bipartisan majority. I spoke with the Speaker of the House the other day, and he indicated that he thought it would be something that they would be able to do this year. He's just got a few things to work through with his caucus, which I respect and understand, having had that job once. But we're going to get that done, and Ohio is going to continue to move forward like we have with improving access and hopefully increasing opportunity. The other thing that we've done that's really been helpful is we mail every voter in Ohio an absentee ballot request, and we will do that for the presidential election. Every once in a while, I have a little fun with people. I say, well, you want to make it easier to vote? I said, how about if we send a government worker to your home with your ballot, and then give you almost a month to fill it out, and then we'll send the same government worker back to pick it up and take it to the Board of Elections. Would that be okay? They say, well, of course, that'd be great. I said, well, that's what absentee voting is. It's the post office. We can get it there. It all works. It all works great. So we're doing a lot on that front. I think we can continue to do more. Technology really can be a friend in this, and that's what online voter registration is all about.
Mary, and I am asking a question on behalf of the audience member Lindsay Gardner. This is regarding issue 1. Do you see the change in redistricting would result in more diverse districts? And if so, do you think those changes would or could influence our rural thinking legislature to consider more urban issues, that is, to bring more awareness for economic development?
Well, yes and no is the answer to that question. I remind you, for somebody that grew up in a town of 4,000 people, I remind you that rural thinking legislators think rurally because that's who they represent. And they're a diverse voice too. And so we have to factor in what everybody thinks about these issues. But the problem about diverse, and when you say diverse can mean gender, it can mean culturally, it can mean ideologically. I believe that we will make the districts, I would probably use the term more ideologically balanced would be the term that I would use, because you're going to have more districts that will be more 50-50 in terms of their political makeup, in terms of whether a Democrat or Republican could win that particular election. And the great thing is that we can have an election where you win based on the quality of your candidate and your ideas and how hard they work, rather than how the districts were drawn. But to the questioner's point, if you feel right now that you're a voice that's not being representative in the legislative process, then this will add to your voice, because it will create more balance among those districts. So that because the people that win those elections will have to represent a broader perspective in what they do. So I believe that I believe that issues that maybe don't get as much attention will get more attention in this if issue 1 is approved.
We should mention that the amendment calls for compact districts, and they have to be contiguous.
Yeah.
You're not going to have the real salamander type.
Yeah, and you make a
layout.
really good point about this, is because one of the tough things is if you look at the demographics of America and the demographics of Ohio, we don't live in purple communities. We tend to live in very red communities or very blue communities, and just we happen to be a state, when you add that all up across all of our state, it turns, very purple. But people tend to live very segregated in the way that they vote. Socioeconomically, racially, people tend to live around people that are like them. If you look at the demographics, I think this is a problem, much bigger problem than redistricting, and that's why Americans, I remember going to during the last presidential election, and you go to some communities and nobody believed that anybody was voting for Barack Obama, and then you go to another one and nobody believed that anybody was voting for Mitt Romney. And in those communities, that was true. But they didn't interact with each other. They don't interact each other in many cases, and that's why we don't understand each other as well as we probably need to solve a broader array of problems.
I'm Kermit Whitfield, and I'm asking a question for Melanie Houston. The question is, would you please speak to what gives the Secretary of State the authority to invalidate recent charter amendments and local ballot initiatives in Athens, Meigs, and other counties in Ohio?
Sure.
That's what the folks outside are protesting.
Yeah, I know. And
So they don't follow you around? No?
They have. I'll go get my picture with them later. The Constitution, the law, is what gives me that authority. And for those of you that don't know what this is really around the issue of fracking, and that there are groups that want to amend either municipal or county charters to give them the authority to prevent fracking from happening in those particular communities. The problem is, for that approach, is that the General Assembly many years ago put the authority for regulating this in the hands of the state. That was challenged under this same provision of municipal or local control before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld the Ohio law in this particular case, and thus the municipal or county charter ordinances are not valid under the Ohio law or the Supreme Court rulings, and so it is on that basis that we made the decisions to invalidate them. However, I will give some instruction right here. That doesn't mean we took the democratic process away from them. They just need to use it in the proper venue, and the proper venue for that is before the legislature, who created the law, or you could use the initiative process to take the issue to all of the voters of the state of Ohio. You just can't do it county to county.
Again, Tim Sword reading for Greg Overmeyer. What happens to the casino monopoly if issue 2 passes?
Great question, Greg. And I will tell you that nothing, because it is a forward-looking provision. What is already in the Constitution would not be affected by this provision, so it's forward-looking and the casinos won't be affected.
This question is from Nancy Ludewise. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. What does this have to do? Why does this have to amend the Constitution? Why can't voters simply choose to approve marijuana or not approve it?
Well, they could. You could do it. You could do it via state law, but the reason kind of goes back to the business model. You're not going to spend millions of dollars to get something passed that the legislature could just turn around and change the next week. That's why this is in the form of a constitutional amendment. So to change any of this related to the marijuana proposal, issue 3, you would have to amend the Constitution. So if there is a fatal flaw in this, it comes out, the only way you can fix it is to amend the Constitution. You can't do it through a simple change in law. And so I will presume this is the reason the casinos did it, this is the reason the marijuana folks are doing this, is because they want their rights protected in the Constitution basically their investment protected in the Constitution, and that's why a constitutional amendment is used versus the statute.
Kermit Whitfield again asking a question for Jane Scott, the president of CMC. What are your thoughts about term limits?
Term limits. I got to the legislature only because of term limits, because I promise you the person that was there before me, he was a good legislator. He would have loved to probably stay and would still be there if there weren't term limits. And so, you know, from that point of view, I have to say that they benefited me, but they're also, from my experience in the legislature, I have seen that that we lose a lot of good people, and then they go run for the Senate, or the House Senate members go run for the House, and it creates a lot of weird dynamics in that point of view. So, you know, I see the virtues of them. I don't think term limits aren't going away. I think if we could just settle on maybe 12 years, but I think the voters would probably, if you gave them a choice between 4 and 12, they'd pick 4.
I just one final sum-up question. I mean, you've been doing this now for quite a while. Is this the best way to run elections, the system we have now, where it's local boards run the elections, you oversee them, you have to rule on things like the fracking issue that causes controversy, you've been sued many times. It seems like it's always a struggle. Is there any way to do it better? It seems like it should be easier than the way it is.
Well, understand, we're Ohio. We face the toughest issues of any state in the country when it comes to elections. And we get through it just fine. Look, things that matter are controversial. People will fight hard for them, and they should, because that's what we have. That's our system of democracy. And I believe that in the end it works out well. Look, those 88 county boards of elections, by and large, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 during my time, work great. They're Democrats and Republicans who fight like cats and dogs outside of the office, but they believe in democracy. They believe, you know, they really believe in the job that they do, and they work together. And they run an election, and the elections in this state are run with integrity, and anything that matters is going to be difficult. You know, from time to time, I will have somebody say, well, should we even elect the chief elections officer? And I, for a time period, thought we shouldn't. But then I talked to a Secretary of State from another state who's appointed, and he said, well, the people in their state want to elect the Secretary of State because appointed people aren't accountable to anybody. And I think that Ohio, after 200 plus years of existence, that we have a system that has been tested during the toughest of times. It works well, and we should be proud of it. And I am truly honored to be Secretary of State and to have a chance to work on these issues because we live in the greatest country in the world, and the idea of self-governance is a great thing.
Thanks for answering my questions, and thanks for your great questions.
I hope you all enjoyed today's forum. We encourage you to continue the conversation in the lobby with coffee and the really, really good cookies. Remember that you can view and share all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Please be sure to register for CMC's annual meeting and summer celebration on September 16th. And before we leave, let's thank our sponsors, Hannah News and Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, and our speakers, Jon Husted and Mike Thompson. And thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you at CMC again soon.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.